Video games can be large time investments, and individuals who play them can only hope that their time spent with them is fulfilling. Similarly, developers who create said games also hope that their players enjoy them, and so in an effort to keep their players engaged, many developers tend to act with an extra layer of attention when creating their game's beginnings, as it's the onset of a player's journey that can very easily determine whether they'll continue playing or not. And yet, while the opening gameplay sequences of video games are critical in maintaining players' retention, so too are title screens. Title screens are, save for the rather empty loading screens that often precede them, the first glimpses that players are given into the journey that they're prepared to embark on. They are the first impressions that players receive regarding the video game that they've purchased, and because of that significance, these screens are able to, when designed and used in creative ways, leave a lasting impact on those who witness them. Of course, as is the case with video games as a whole, these title screens can vary greatly in style and intention in order to achieve their particular goals. And over time, I've encountered a number of title screens that truly stand out, at least to me, thanks to the artistic choices that were made when developing them. While many title screens are simplistic in their presentation, which is by no means a detrimental thing, a portion of the more memorable ones that players may encounter are able to leave an impression thanks to their dynamic nature or their tendency to change in various ways. Games in the Legend of Zelda franchise have often toyed with dynamic title screens, at least in minor ways that have typically involved dynamic camera angles that aim to imbue Link's new journey with a particular feeling. The well-renowned title screen of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is an early example of this, which not only contains camera work that puts an emphasis on the grand scale of exploration found in Link's very first three-dimensional Hyrule, but also showcases the kingdom's very first day-to-night cycle as Link, atop his horse, rides across a once unimaginably large Hyrule field. The title screen doesn't present anything particularly unique, as showcasing a game's world within its opening screen had been done many times before. However, in the case of such a groundbreaking title, showing off Hyrule field in order to encapsulate the scale of a series' transition to 3 dimensions, paired alongside a musical piece that perfectly captures the somber tone of the game's story, was enough to allow Ocarina of Time's title screen to not only stand out when it was released, but to leave a lasting impression to this day. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask followed in its predecessor's footsteps, but with the new scale of The Legend of Zelda's worlds having already been established, the camera work present in the franchise's second Nintendo 64 installment instead focused solely on Clocktown, its residents, and the terminal fate that hangs just above them, allowing for a far more disturbing message to be left by this title screen. A message that let players know that the story they were in for would not be pleasant. Numerous releases in the Legend of Zelda series have followed this formula, such as Twilight Princess, which showcased its somber world in a manner similar to Ocarina of Time's title screen, and The Wind Waker, which thanks to its jaunty music and bright visuals sets a far more adventurous tone. The idea of a title screen with significance driven by dynamic camera work is not a new one, nor a particularly unique one, but when used for the right purpose can invoke feelings quite strongly. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 also features a changing title screen, but using a fairly different method. When initially examining the game's title screen, it won't change in the slightest. In fact, it could and likely will take hours for players to notice that it does in fact change. That's because this title screen morphs to reflect the area most predominantly featured in the chapter of the game that players are currently progressing through. Because this screen changes very few times throughout the course of a playthrough, when a new title screen is encountered, the change is quite a noticeable one. And because of their presence in a game as story-driven as Xenoblade Chronicles 2, each of these unique screens may evoke remembrances of different moments in the game's story that resonated with different players. In a similar manner, Luigi's Mansion 3 also contains a title screen that only changes once a particular event in the game is triggered. However, this screen only changes once. When players initially begin their journey, they may be expecting a title screen with dark colors and spooky music, and yet they're instead met with the sight of a beautiful hotel lit by a sunny day. It's only when they first encounter King Boo and are presented with the hotel's haunted nature that the title screen morphs into the eerie welcome that's expected of the Luigi's Mansion series. While it may not have as much story significance as Xenoblade Chronicles 2's title screens, this transition was still a very fun detail to watch watch unfold. A game which released more recently than even the last two mentioned also contains a title screen that changes with its story, Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity. This title allows players to encounter the people and events of the Great Calamity that occurred prior to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and has 3 title screens that are displayed before, during, and after the Great Calamity's terror. With their unique lighting and beautiful music tracks, these 3 title screens are able to wonderfully magnify the calm before the calamity's rise, the hopelessness that pursues throughout its reign, and the peace that results from its eradication. Having known the context given by Breath of the Wild, many players expected the rise of the Great Calamity, and yet this game gave those players ample time to grow more attached than ever to the characters who fell victim to it. And so when the calamity does ensue in this release and players know what chaos they're bound to witness, the title screens changing to reflect that only adds to the growing tension that this game fosters from its very onset, in an impressively effective manner. It's through this specific camera work, the showing of significant story details, and the progression of in-game events that dynamic title screens are able to convey whatever feelings they desire so effectively. With video games being such an expansive and creative form of media, however, it's only natural that title screens have come in many different forms, and contrary to the aforementioned examples, minimalistic title screens can also be quite effective at displaying a given title's underlying tone. With minimalism comes a distinct lack of extensive details that can be used to portray developers' ideas, and so these simplistic title screens typically instead rely on music, slight visual changes, and distinct colorations to convey what it is that they wish to. Hollow Knight primarily comes to mind, having recently completed that game. The title screen is admittedly very lacking in extravagant details, and yet it's far from uninspired or uncreative. The screen most predominantly features, as expected, Hollow Knight's white logo, which is plastered over a black screen. Save for that logo, only 2 things truly stand out here, with one being the slight ray of light cast over the screen's center, and the other being the desolation present in the game's title theme. The beam of light, which only barely manages to illuminate the otherwise colorless void of a background, while perhaps appearing rather unimportant, could possibly convey a number of things to different players. To me, the beam of light appears to represent the dwindling hope of Hallownest and how faint that hope has become over time. Of course, its significance will vary from player to player, and some may find little significance in such a minute detail at all, but one thing that most will be able to agree on is the despondency of the music that plays as the title screen is shown. The track, aptly named Hollow Knight, features a bright, almost piercing piano which has been affected by so much reverberation that it produces a lasting ambient droning in the background. Alongside this piano, a viola was chosen as the player of the title theme's melody, and this viola, with its elastic timbre that throughout the game can range from rich and soothing to sharp and grating, is what drives the title theme's monotonous sense of unrest. It's this ability to connect this title screen's music and subtle visuals to Hollow Knight's distressing story in various ways that fostered my appreciation of this title's opening display. But it was another game released much earlier that initially awoke my awareness of the beauty that could be found in simplistic title screens, and that game is Xenoblade Chronicles. When I say simplistic in regards to this release's title screen, do keep in mind that I'm primarily referring to its visual aspects, as the music that accompanies it is anything but. As is the case with the game's aforementioned sequel, Xenoblade Chronicles is a game driven by its story, and its title screen complements that story in a way that appears simple, but can in fact be considered impressively deep. In an effort to avoid spoilers, I'll point out aspects of this title screen that can have dozens of significant implications dependent on individual players, but not discuss what said implications may be. The placement of the Monado at the screen's center could very well be a choice made for the sole purpose of aesthetics or symmetry, but could also reference a number of more complex plot points, as could the seemingly eternal flat plane of grass that stretches into the horizon. Even the transition from day to night that takes place as players rest on the title screen could, and likely does, symbolize far more than merely the presence of the game's day to night mechanic. These simple design choices, much like those made in Hollow Knight, are crafted in such a way that gives them little significance to players who have yet to experience Xenoblade Chronicles, but as players progress through the expansive title's story, they're given the freedom to imbue these minimalistic elements with any number of their own purposes or ideas. And that's what makes screens such as this one, as simplistic as they may be, just as capable as those with impressive dynamics and complex visuals. While all of the aforementioned title screens have primarily been significant because of their relations to their respective games' stories or emotions, this doesn't have to be the case for a title screen to be memorable. In fact, 3 of my favorite title screens are memorable to me not because of their thematic significance, but instead because they're interactive. Video games are meant to be played, and many developers carry that philosophy into their title screens by implementing gameplay elements within them. Super Mario 64 is one of, if not the most well-known examples of this. Upon inserting this game, players are prompted to press start, but should they choose instead to interact with the floating head of Mario that's been placed before them, they'll be able to contort various features of his face as they please. The rearranging of Mario's facial features holds no significance within the actual game, nor does it heighten the primary gameplay of Super Mario 64. It's just a fun thing to do when players launch their game, and it adds a lot of charm to an already groundbreaking release. In an even more involved manner, both releases in the Super Mario Maker series have given players large amounts of control in their title screens by creating levels that they can traverse through on the title screens themselves. Super Mario Maker 2 allows Mario to play through a number of pre-made levels, and should players choose to begin their session by creating a level of their own, the title screen will seamlessly transition into the level builder, with whatever stage that was present on the title screen being loaded for players to make changes to. This system was present in the original Super Mario Maker as well, but with the help of the Wii U gamepad in that title, players are able to tap on various words and letters of the game's logo in order to spawn different effects, enemies, and items. Tapping the word Super grants stars, tapping the first R in the logo spawns coins, hitting the O creates a Koopa clown car, touching the M in Mario's name flips it, promptly retitling the game to Super Wario Maker, and tapping outside of the logo spawns a number of random items. While players will generally be more excited to create their own levels or play those of others, these games having their own interactive levels to experiment with on the title screen is a fun addition that, while not necessary by any means, has brought a lot of creativity to these already limitless releases. Sure, Mario's face doesn't need to be distorted in ways beyond repair, and players don't need pre-made levels to mess around with when they can simply make their own, but these interactive additions, just like minimalism and dynamics, are another way for developers to create a title screen that players will remember for years to come. Title screens are a gateway into the sometimes grand, sometimes goofy, sometimes emotional, enraging, or soothing journeys that are video games. They're the first glimpse into what players are getting themselves into, and because of that, they have the capacity to convey so much when made properly. And yet, a properly designed title screen is a creation as flexible as video games themselves. There isn't one thing that makes a title screen memorable. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time was made notable thanks to its camera work, which was used to imbue a great sense of scale into the first three-dimensional Hyrule. And contrarily, Hollow Knight stands out thanks to its simplistic design, which can be granted as much or as little meaning as desired by particular players. Super Mario 64, lacking a particularly engaging story to connect its title screen to, instead characterizes itself by the ability to contort Mario's face. And of course, who can forget Super Smash Bros. Brawl's title screen, with its exciting intro cinematic followed by the loudest sound recorded in human history. Yes, many title screens aren't particularly notable or unique when compared to dozens of others, but as is the case with any form of media, there are a number of them that, through creative usage of visuals, audio, and player interaction, manage to stand out. And the group of title screens that do manage to be remembered fondly is different for each and every player, which is perhaps the most exciting part of it all. Thank you all so much for watching.